In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects.
We're going to cover how to manage or filter content on social media. And of course, this came about from our conversation on Twitter and how Twitter has, in the past and recently, been handling some of the content that comes through. And there's different schools of thought. Some people feel like it should be very heavily moderated, and only the nicest things be allowed to be spoken about. And other people are more open to the free market of ideas, if you will, where let anything go out there and let people decide what they want to hear, and then let them decide. Let them be their own filters. That about where how you see things.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think this is one of the most difficult. I think I'm really glad I don't have to deal with this because I think this content moderation would be so difficult, next to impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is, and of course, there's been when some of these social media sites have gotten a little heavy-handed with their moderation, people have gotten frustrated and gone out and said, "Well, we're going to go and start our own social media site." And then you have some of these other places that start up, and they tend to be echo chambers of their own mindsets, at least from what I've read or heard about from the outside. I don't really go to these other places. Gab being one, Truth Social being another. They tend to be less uh, open to ideas contrary to their own. I don't know if you have any experience or any thoughts on any of that.
No, I don't really have any thoughts, but I understand why people are frustrated because so many of these things are these. When the Twitter files came out and they were talking about how they handled the Hunter Biden thing, some people were upset. When they saw those tweets that I guess Matt Taibbi, I think is how you pronounce his name. He put together like 30 or 40 tweets, kind of giving us a download onto what had happened when Twitter had um, taken or suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story. And many people were upset about that because they said, "Well, it's almost like they're just making it up as they go along there." Um, which I don't know if that was a valid concern or not. To me, it doesn't seem like a valid criticism because I think you'd have to. When you look at, even something as easy as hate speech, and we'd say, well, we don't want hate speech on the platform. Sometimes hate speech is kind of hazy. You know, we could look at some comments made by Donald Trump just before January 6th, which to some people seem pretty tame, and to other people are incitements of violence. And then there's statements by Maxine Waters, and some of those are, some people say, well, it's tame, and some are, and so you can, first of all, how would you find that without somebody kind of reporting it? How do you just find statements like that through an automated process? And even when they come in, well, is it really incitement or is it kind of the gray area? And if
Sure.
you, if you, if you take one off of the platform but not the other, then you're going to have some people upset and other people happy. You know what I mean? It's a difficult thing. I don't know how they're going to get it done, but it's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It is. And to go back to that reporting by let's call him Taibbi, whether that's correct or not. That's what we'll refer to the man that put out those tweets about some of the behind the scenes activity at Twitter when the Hunter Biden laptop story broke. One of the criticisms I heard about the reporting from Taibbi is that it was very limited. It wasn't like, here's everything that happened. There was a couple screenshots here and there, and people are asking, well, if you're trying to be, open to the whole thing and trying to, show us what was going on behind the scenes, why are you only showing limited snapshots that presumably are supporting your perspective rather than showing us everything that might have been happening? Which
Yeah.
is interesting. Probably
Yeah,
not.
very interesting. Yeah, hopefully at some point we get a full download of just everything. It would be because it's not even showing us, how would you say, it's not even showing us the algorithm that they use to promote some tweets and not others.
Yeah.
All it is showing us, um, the uh, the decisions that they actually made.
Yeah.
And it would be, you know, I mean, maybe there's just more out there that I haven't seen, but that's my biggest complaint about it is it didn't seem clear really why they did it. It was like, well, it's hacked material. Like, well, hacked by whom? And I don't know. It was just you'd think that, well, here's the rule, and we're following this rule, and it's very clear and concise, and we know exactly why and how it fits into this under this rule. But it seemed a little bit vague, which maybe is just going to be the case when you have to, moderate so many tweets and so many people and so much information flowing through that outlet.
Yeah, and when you and I talk about some of these things, we often find ourselves agreeing at the extreme ends. You and I would totally agree that you cannot call for someone's death, or call for assaulting on someone's children. But then you get into as you get closer to the middle, there's going to be areas where yeah, it is confusing, it is gray, it's uncertain. And so one of the things that I did is I went and found on Twitter their policy as it exists at this moment. And this is only part of their policy, but it says you may not promote violence against or directly attack or threaten other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, caste, sexual orientation, gender, blah, 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 a bunch of other things. We don't allow accounts whose primary purpose is inciting harm towards others on the basis of these categories, which that's reasonable. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you go back to 2019, they had a broader idea of what they were not going to allow. In part, it said in 2019, we prohibit language that dehumanizes others on the basis of religion, caste, age, disability, disease, and so on, and other categorizations. So it's not just about promoting violence towards other people, it's a more broader dehumanization. And of course, one would ask, is that going too far? And to answer that question, you have a thought on that, first of all?
Yeah, I don't know what it means. I'd like to answer that question because I have no idea. Like, how do you decide that? I mean, I think you can probably give clear examples of dehumanizing, um, but it's such an odd term. Like, it could be applied very broadly, which would obviously be the concern that people are going to have.
Sure, and I'm sure it is a valid. You're right. You could come up with very clear examples. Referring to some particular group of people as being not human is not. I mean, there's times you might choose a particular animal to compare them to, but it is sort of vague about how someone is human. So applying it's going to be difficult. But then, of course, the question comes up: should there be some sort of application of that rule? And so I went and found a week ago, maybe a little longer. Musk had tweeted that hate speech is down 1/3 since he had taken over the company. And around that same time, there was an organization called Center for Countering Digital Hate, and they put out some other information. They said that tweets containing and they didn't, I'm going to paraphrase here, a particular slur that's usually applied to African Americans. Tweets containing that word was up 300%. Tweets containing a particular word that's a slur towards homosexuality is up 30%. Tweets containing a word that's derogatory towards Jewish people up 25%, and Hispanics up almost 60%. So there has been an increase in negative labels towards particular groups of people. And again, one might argue, well, is being mean reason to being silenced? And this is where we get into, whether it's important or not. There has been some connections that have been made between negative language and violent action.
Brian, I don't know. I think we both agree. Like, we don't want the N word on there. We don't want, like, the things they're talking about. They seem like bad things.
Okay.
But what's interesting, I was looking for something similar because I had seen something from Musk online about how he was saying hate speech. He was talking about hate speech was way down. he said it really spiked when he took over, and he ascribed some of that, which was interesting that people were so critical of him for a couple of reasons. One, he was just like he can't set up all the systems to correct everything the minute he gets there. Like that seems like more a problem that already existed. But they were very critical of him, like he was somehow the cause of it. I don't know. But then the fact, so and he said there were a lot of bots, and you'd think two things. One, yeah, that was the system that was already in place, not really as much his fault as his predecessors. And then two, of course, if somebody created bots to spur those tweets or to create those tweets, en masse, then, to make Elon Musk look bad, that's one possible explanation for it. But everybody, when I did a search on the news, almost every news source was talking about how much hate speech was up. And finally, I was trying to figure it out because Musk was saying it was down and everybody else was saying it was up, but everybody's just talking about how it's up. Well, in a Gizmodo article, I put it on the on our shared document just before, because I found it right before we started. They're talking about how Musk's claims have been contradicted and how bad it is right now and everything. But then they have an interesting article or paragraph that says Twitter did not immediately respond to a request for comment. They don't have a communications department at present after Musk laid off half the company. I think it's way more. That's like 90% of the company that he laid off.
Yeah.
However, he tweeted in the New York Times story on the hate speech study that it was utterly false. He then doubled down on his claims, reposting his original graph ad, writing that hate speech impressions continue to decline. So the paragraph says also that the data doesn't directly contradict Musk's claims. However, it demonstrates that his victory lap was disingenuous, blah, blah, blah. He referenced impressions, a metric that measures how many people see a piece of content as opposed to the number of times hateful slurs were used in tweets, which to me seems like the more appropriate number, doesn't it? I mean, if somebody is tweeting a whole bunch of stuff, but nobody's seeing it, I think that's fine. If hateful slurs, if it's not arriving to anybody, I think that's a good thing, isn't it? But nobody seems to be talking about it in the news media.
No one seems to be talking about the contrast between the two metrics. Is that what you're saying?
Or the fact that they're all kind of saying, "Hey, isn't this terrible? There's so many more tweets that are coming out that have hateful slurs." Mm-hmm. Nobody seems to be even presenting the other side of the story that, like, well, I mean, that's true, but also impressions are down, which maybe is a good thing. They're not even presenting the other side of the story,
right?
Which it seems obvious that they should be.
It should be. If I mean, you'd have to have someone that has a good understanding of technology and how it works in order to do that, which is why it makes sense it's coming from Gizmodo, which is more technology focused than a lot of other places. Now,
no, you don't.
What?
That's not true.
What's not true?
I mean, you can see that it says hate speech impressions as opposed to tweets. Like you just have to see the different words that are being used, just like I did.
Did you know the difference before you read the article?
I mean, it says right there, hate speech impressions. Like, I don't think you need to be an expert to at least you could find out what they're talking about, why they're saying hate speech impressions are down. Like Gizmodo is biased. I mean, they're presenting this in a biased way because they're minimizing the fact that hate speech impressions are down. And there's very little talk about that in the article. Nobody else is even going to that point. I think this stuff, it's not like Gizmodo is the only one out there that can figure this out.
Right. I mean, it's not complex, but you do have to have some sort of basis for understanding of how these sort of things work. Now, I do want to go back a little bit to some of the things that you were saying earlier, which is that you were saying that that this increase in activity implies that it was a pre-existing problem, and actually that's not true because Musk fired so many people. If some of the people that he fired, or some of the people that would have managed some of this content moderation, then no, it didn't exist beforehand. And the fact that we have such a large increase in the number of tweets, not impressions, number of tweets since he's taken over, does speak to the fact there's a lot more people putting out this language. Now, I think it is valid to address the fact that these tweets are not as far-reaching as they used to be. Now, It could be that there's some sort of algorithm in place that's limiting these tweets, or maybe the people that are not sharing them as much as they were before, or it's possible that some of these people that are tweeting this sort of content don't have the same reach as they used to because they've been out of the loop for so long, and that give them a little bit more time to be able to reach a larger audience, and those tweets will be just as large, because we don't really know yet what is, how this is all going to play out. He's owned the company for 1 month, I think. And a lot has happened in that 1 month, and he came in with some pretty dramatic changes. And I'm just not just talking about the change in their policy towards hate speech that I read to you earlier, but the entire departments no longer exist over there. And I believe I read someplace, and I don't know how, I'm going off memory and whether it was reported accurately. I think one of the departments that doesn't exist is content moderation. The fact that when Ye was taken off of Twitter, he got a personal phone call from Elon Musk about doing that, about what he was doing. I don't think anybody else that's going to be kicked off Twitter is going to get a personal phone call from the CEO or the president or the owner, the boss, from the company saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about taking you off. You need to go and change your behavior or apologize or pull it down." So he doesn't have a real system right now for managing this sort of thing, at least one that's obvious.
Yeah, those are just huge conclusions that you're jumping to. I'm really surprised that you would say that he doesn't have a system that he's using.
Content moderation doesn't exist.
How are hate speech impressions down then?
Well, I don't know. And this is also, he put out the graph. And so he didn't put out the information behind the graph. Did you just make that number up?
Most of the news stories didn't put out the information either. They just reported on it. I don't. You're much more inclined to believe everyone those other news organizations and not this hate speech impressions. And people, I mean, he had people that had been at Twitter for a long time. They're not denying the fact that hate speech impressions are lower.
Say
So
that again.
there are plenty of people that have been at Twitter for a long time that are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's coming out and saying, "Oh, his graph is made up."
No one's contradicting the boss, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, people have at some points at points when he's tweeted different things, but yeah, they're not contradicting what he's saying. And there's plenty of people that have left that were, Yoel Roth, who was the head of trust and safety at Twitter for a long time, stayed on a few weeks afterwards, and he wasn't contradicting it. And even after he quit and left of his own accord, hasn't contradicted it since. All
Yeah.
he's done is said that they were incorrect in suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story. That's all he said since he's left.
And we also don't know the terms of their leavings. We don't know if there's been any NDAs that have been signed. And he probably doesn't even know what the algorithm was that created that graph. I'm assuming not many people would, other than the person that created it.
I would imagine that the head of trust and safety knows a little bit about the hate speech impressions. Hopefully, he's been looking at that for a long time.
Perhaps.
That's a part. That would be a big part of his job.
Let me also just point out here that just as you accuse me of jumping onto the one side of the story, you jump as easily onto the other side of the story. That Musk is putting out the correct information, and that the Twitter is working as it should. I don't know if that's
right. I was trying to counter the argument that you made. You're right. I don't think we have all the answers. You were making this argument, and I think almost all of the mainstream media is presenting this from one side, that, hey, hate speech is up, hate speech is up. And then I found a point in this Gizmodo article that explains a very reasonable explanation as to why that could be happening. That, yeah, the overall tweets are up, and that's what Gizmodo says, but maybe hate speech impressions are down. And I think that should be a much bigger part of even the Gizmodo story and a much bigger part of what we talk about, because I mean, they're the one. I got this not just from Elon Musk, but from Twitter or from Gizmodo, that they're saying that. I mean, I guess they're just presenting what he said, but if that's true, that hate speech impressions are down, okay, that would explain it. I don't have all the answers, and I don't trust, blindly what Elon Musk has said or what the mainstream media has said, but at least there's another explanation for it. And you were presenting it in a way of saying, well, all these people have left. That's why everything's going poorly. But hate speech impressions are down. That would contradict that. I mean, at least we got to present it, from both sides. You're right. Maybe the fact that I thought he had laid off like 85-90% of the organization. Well, if that's true, it could be a possible reason why there's more hate speech tweets happening on there. There's a lot of other possible explanations as well. People saw this as an opportunity to discredit Elon Musk, so they created bots that were creating these hateful tweets in mass numbers. I mean, I don't think just because Elon Musk takes over that all these white supremacists all of a sudden say, "Hey," an anti-Semite say, "Hey, let's get on let's get on there and start tweeting. We finally are allowed to do it." I find that a little bit hard to believe.
Well, there was also the fact that he did reinstate a lot of accounts that had been, and I don't know what metric he used to reinstate accounts, but I know that there's a bunch of them that have now been put back online. And so if these people have been freed from Twitter jail, they can, who knows how active they're actually going to be. But I think a bigger question here that you and I should probably look at is what should be filtered, what should be moderated. And it sounds like we agree that slurs, derogatory language towards individuals should not be allowed, correct?
Yeah. I just would guess, and it would be difficult to go into all of them now, but I would guess there's going to be some that we agree on and some that we disagree on, and there's going to be some that other people want, and maybe both of us or one of us would disagree on. I think that's where it becomes difficult. If we give the example of, if we talk, for example, and I don't know if this is the way that you want to go with this or not, but I can give specific examples that I found of things that people said that some would consider calls to violence and other people wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it becomes difficult because you say, if somebody says, "Hey, you need to, if you see these politicians or these Supreme Court justices out in public, you need to get in their faces and build a crowd and get after them and let them know how you feel, and don't let them be comfortable wherever they go. Confront them in restaurants." Like, I mean, some people would say that's a problem. Other people would say, no, that's fine to say that. It's not really violence. You're just saying that you're going to talk with them. I don't know. And then other people, when you look at the end of Donald Trump's speech, and he says, "We're going to fight. We're going to go down there. We're going to tell these Republicans, not the strong ones, only the weak ones, that they need to fight back for us." Well, you're like, well, is that a call to violence? Like, I think some people looked at that speech, and said it was clearly a call to violence, and other people didn't. So in all these things, like, I think there's some slurs that, yep, we're all going to agree on. And then there's other ones that we're going to be like, yeah, maybe that's not a slur. But maybe I'm delving too much into the details. I just think, or Brian, it becomes so difficult too. One other thing I thought of was, let's say, for example, the N-word. I think we all agree on that one. It's got to be off but is the N-word as a rapper uses it with an A at the end? Is that allowed? You know what I mean?
Or do we have to check the color of the skin of the person who's saying it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or if somebody's quoting somebody else, is that allowed?
Yeah.
Or if somebody says it, or if there's some sort of a hate speech, but I'm only quoting somebody, how is the automated system going to look in there and say, well, this is a quote tweet, or he's just quoting what somebody else said, as opposed to, and maybe they can do that to some degree, or maybe some people are going to make fun of, or say, "Hey, he shouldn't have said this. Look what he said. Look how terrible it is." Does that person get kicked off? I don't know. It's going to be really difficult. It's going to be a very manual process because there's so many gray areas that we're going to be dealing with.
Yeah, no, there totally is, and but there has to be a line. I mean, there's two approaches. One is to say it's too complicated, we're not going to do anything, or the other is we're going to make best efforts. We're going to try and be as honest. We're going to try and be as open as possible, and we'll get it wrong sometimes. And there's going to be some people that aren't going to be happy with the decisions we make. Sometimes people will come up and try and call us out and say, "But you're doing it wrong because of this circumstance you may not be aware of, or what I meant was this, or whatever it might be." And not everyone's going to win their appeal, but we have to draw a line somewhere. And I think this is the hardest part with a lot of these social media companies, is the idea of social media has been evolving over time. What it's meant, what these companies were doing. And it's turned into, and people talk a lot about the public square. The social media is the new public square. Well, that it may be, but I don't think many of the social media companies had the idea that they were going to be the public square when they first started the idea of connecting friends and family. So here we are. Whether we're the public square or not is probably up for debate, but there has to be a policy in place. And I think as long as that policy is very clear and well known, there still will be, not everyone's going to be happy with it or with how it's being implemented. But I think that's the start to being able to figure how to manage this or wander through this minefield.
But I think there's more to it. Obviously there needs to be something in place, and we're not going to throw our hands up and let just anything happen. But to my mind, where the rubber meets the road, or where it becomes really difficult, is how how should I say this? How much are we going to be? Listen, we're going to look for the most egregious examples and that are just plain obvious and do those, or are we going to really try to get into the weeds? For example, Maxine Waters' comment. Uh, let's just read it real quick, if it's okay. If I can find it. She said, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and create a crowd and push back on them. You tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. And some people would say, well, no, that's fine. And other people would say, no, you're encouraging people to go after public officials in public and to confront them. And who knows if that becomes a mob and somebody gets hurt. So, like, are we going to push back against that? Or are we just going to say, no, no, that's fine? Like, I think that the more you just let those things go a little bit, I think maybe that's better, because it's more difficult when you have both sides of the aisle saying things. And I don't know, there's no clear line to me in a statement like that okay, here's why it's wrong, or here's why it's right.
First of all, let me say, I believe personally she was wrong to make that statement, because what she's doing is she's encouraging people to harass people that are doing performing a public service. They're whether you're an elected politician, whether you're a judge, whatever it is that you're doing, you're out there trying to serve the people. You and I may disagree on what that means and how you're going to go about doing it. But encouraging these people to be harassed, I think, is really a poor choice. Now, clearly she was angry. I think what's more important here is, I think what you're getting at is, do we allow a statement like this on social media? And I think that is an interesting question. I think it is. Do we allow people to encourage harassment? Because that's what she was doing.
Yep.
Now, she wasn't encouraging social media harassment. She was encouraging harassment in real life, in the real space. And in many ways, I think that's worse, because I can turn off my social media. I can disconnect it from my phone,
or block people.
Well, so public servants can't always, unless if they have a public account, if they use it for public business. But yeah, I mean, you could hypothetically block people. But if it's happening in real life, now I'm stuck at home. Am I not allowed to leave my house for fear of being harassed by someone that disagrees with my decisions? And I'd never thought about this until you and I started having this conversation. At this point, I would probably be inclined, open to changing my mind, to say that sort of behavior should not be allowed, because it can have such an impact on life. And yeah. I know that you said otherwise. You said you would probably allow it.
Oh, I don't know if I said that. I'm kind of up in the air. I kind of think to myself, maybe I did kind of allude to the fact that I probably would allow it, just because it becomes difficult. Like, where do you draw the line? If you took out a few of the things that I didn't say, if you took out the create a crowd, if you took out the you're not welcome, just said, go confront them or go talk with them. Instead of saying confront them, you said, well, go talk with them and let them know how you feel. I'm just telling them to talk with people. That's what our public officials are for. Like, where do you draw the line, and where do you say? And then they just become very skilled at walking that line. Well, I can't. There's certain words that I can't say. Like, it's a tricky place to be. and maybe that's enough. Maybe it's enough if we say, well, you have to just say that you're going to talk with people. That's okay, but it's not okay. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
such a tricky one, and I don't envy them. I find it because I'm with you. This is wrong. She should not have done that. And I'm sure that it's happened on both sides of the aisle, that both sets of politicians have done stuff like this, and it's wrong. But how do you stop people from doing it? How do you take it off of Twitter? I don't know, because it becomes a very tricky thing and a very manual process. Because what's going to trigger an algorithm to find this type of stuff? I don't know.
I don't know that this would solve the problem. I know this won't solve the problem, but I wonder if you were to take out the social media element altogether and say, what if we were just in real life? A couple people sitting around talking. What if we actually were in this quote unquote public square and someone was standing on a soapbox and putting these ideas forth? Would it be permitted? And I don't know if that brings any more clarity to the conversation, or if it's just another facet to the same issue. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I would say, if you think about the First Amendment, because a lot of people, when talking about social media and these types of issues, they reference the First Amendment, which I think inappropriately or incorrectly. And
And why?
the First Amendment says it talks about Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof. And here's the important thing, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble or to petition government for the redress of grievances.
Yeah.
So freedom of speech is the government won't restrict us from saying what we want. But because these are private companies, obviously they can make different rules. You can't go to the New York Times and say, "Hey, I wrote an article, and because in this country we have freedom of speech, you have to publish it."
Right.
Obviously they're going to say, "No, we don't do that. We've got our own people that do that." And even on social media, I think social media should, in my mind, allow more speech. And I said this in a previous discussion. They should allow more speech because they have become sort of a town square where they do allow people to say what they want. They don't have to. I mean, they can do whatever they want. If they want to, they could, keep Democrats or Republicans or anybody off, libertarians, they could keep them off the site, or they could, religions or whatever. But obviously, they would probably lose a lot of their customers if they did that. But they can do what they want. But I think it is a place where it's closer to they people should have a right to say what they want, even if they're incorrect. They should have, and we can't just. I don't think we should very quickly just take people off because we think they're wrong. I mean, so many times we've said that people are wrong, and then we find out later that they're right. I mean, for years people were talking about how schools should be segregated, and they had scientific data, bad data, but they had scientific data. And if we had social media in the 1940s, they probably would have been kicked off for saying those things. And no, we should not restrict people from saying those things, obviously. And I'm using an extreme example, of course, but that's why it's so important, I think, to kind of let people say what they want. And although, you can go in front of Congress and uh, you can exercise your free speech there. You can peaceably assemble in front of Congress or whatever. I think that's fine. You don't have as much free speech as you do in the whole country on Twitter, meaning you can go and walk around and people say anti-Semitic things on the streets of New York, and that's allowed, and the police don't come after them for it.
Are you sure?
Hmm.
'Cause
I mean, what some people would consider anti-Semitic.
Okay, yeah, because I think there are certain groups that are protected, and I think a basis of religion is one of the groups that are protected, and I think they do get as opposed to insulting someone for their political ideology, which is an unprotected group. I think
Well, go
religion.
listen, Brian. Go listen to the Black Israelites in New York City, and they'll. I mean, the things they say about white people, not just they consider themselves the true Jews. But what they say about white people is terrible too. And that's allowed, you know, because they have their freedom of speech. Now, would we allow all the things that are said, you know, out in the public square on Twitter? I don't think so. You do have to draw the line somewhere, as you indicated. It's just a question of exactly where. And I think the more you try to get into the details and restrict more and more, then it becomes murkier and murkier. I think you should tend a little bit towards letting people say things and being wrong and saying, not to say that you allow, the racial slurs or any types of slurs. I don't think you allow that. But we should be a little bit careful in stepping into those gray areas because it becomes difficult to discern, which I think is why people were so frustrated with Twitter in the first place. We had the issues with the Hunter Biden laptop. We had the issues with the Babylon Bee, a parody website making jokes, and people were upset about that. Well, listen, we're just making jokes. No, we think that's hate speech, so they took it off. It's a difficult place to be.
It is. And we only just have a moment here. And let me say, to kind of finalize my side of things, which is that although I do want to be careful that, that I think that it's too easy to be dismissive and to allow a lot of the violent speech on there, I do tend to agree with you a little bit on this, which is that people are too sensitive. People do not want to be offended, and so they try and create these rules where they won't be offended. And I feel like we should. It's okay to go to a comedy club and get insulted once in a while, and it's okay to have someone say something you don't agree with. And I do feel like this is something we could err a little bit more, slightly more on the libertarian side than on the protective side.
Yeah, and once again, like where we just finding that line is just what's so difficult. We're not going to solve it today, but I agree. Thank you for saying that. And I, it's just a really difficult issue that I don't know. It's going to take a lot of work to fine tune this one.
And no one's going to be happy whatever way it's done. I mean, not everyone will be happy. Though someone will be happy, but there'll be a lot of people that won't be happy. However you do it. All right. Well, that one wasn't so volatile.
Combative.
Yeah, a little change. So next week we're going to talk a little bit about the background behind some of the media, some of the sources, and how they go about vetting their stuff, and how we can find the good stuff.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you later.
See you, Brian.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.